an ultimate global podcast. Hello, and welcome to our special weekly podcast on trending international and social affairs. You're listening to Saurabh Kora and George Mavros from Sydney.
So welcome to another exciting series of episodes that we are doing on the CXOs, founders and co-founders. It's not something new. It's something which we have already been doing with a couple of other CEOs, current CEOs, retired CEOs, other co-founders and founders. And this one is no different. We are being joined by Margaret Wright from Australia. She is the chair of OmniTabs, and she is also the member of the Technology and Projects Committee to the board of UniSuper. But that's not just about her accolades. It's also about this exciting stuff that she's doing beyond those accolades towards making Australia, a better place to live in for the people. And I think that's why when I chatted with Margaret few months ago, I think now, 1 or 2 months ago, and I was pretty impressed. I thought that why not just give her a call and book a podcast with her, because her insights can be pretty valuable for anyone who's listening to us tonight. So Margaret, why not just you go with your introduction instead of us introducing you, so that you narrate your own story to the audience?
So I actually watched the Victor Dominello podcast, which is when I started thinking this was great. So he said he was a newbie when he started in politics. I'm a serial newbie. So I've just done new stuff all the time. I wanted to be an architect or a archaeologist or a detective. But then I ended up being in IT, because my dad found out there was a job at the local, he was working for New Zealand Herald, found out there was a job there, and they sponsored me on a course, programming. So I did coding in the 1970s. And so there were a lot of women then. Now, just very quickly, that something really interesting happened that sort of made me go, "Geez, this is interesting." So after I'd been there 3 months, the managing director called us all up and said, "You've all got to join the union," because apparently our names had been taken off the list for the Clerical Workers Union, and the printers were getting upset and we're going to go on strike. So we went, "Oh, okay, we'll all join the union." 3 months later, after we'd all joined the union, we go and are asked to go and see him again. And I thought, well, what can it be this time? And he said, basically, "You're all being retrenched except for 3 of you." And I was one of the ones being retrenched. And so we all went to the pub, as you do, afterwards. And the guy who was in charge of payroll, and back in those days, everything fitted into about this much space. And some of the programs were sort of like 50, 100 times as big as the space. And so it was very, very complex program. He changed the payroll. He told us at the pub, I changed the payroll program so it wouldn't work anymore, and went off into the bush on holidays, and they came to pick me up in a helicopter, brought me back, and I fixed it in 5 minutes, and they gave me a pay rise. And I went, holy shit. I couldn't believe that someone would do something like that. But anyway, so that was the end of that job. And I then went to work in 2 other programming jobs at Data Bank in New Zealand, which did all the check clearing for all of the banks in New Zealand overnight back in 1972, which is pretty amazing. And then I then went off moved down to Dunedin, because I'm a Kiwi if you didn't pick the accent. And I worked there for about 2 or 3 years at a place called Bar Burgess, which was Coopers and Lybrand. And I did all sorts of jobs, but I ended up having to work till 3 a.m. And I actually got picked up by the police, but that's another whole story for a later time. And taken back to my motel. And I decided I didn't want to work till 3 a.m. anymore, so I changed jobs. And I went back to university, did accounting, audit and tax. And after I finished that, which was quite different from IT, started at Pete Marwick, which then became KPMG. And it's the most I've ever learned in my whole life. My first job, the people I worked for were amazing. But in this one, they sent us out to look at processes and systems. and things, and we came back with all our files very proudly, and I got 12 pages of queries in small printing. And you know how you go, I spent hours on this, what did I do wrong? And then the senior manager explained to me really carefully about all the questions. And so my job from then on was to reduce the number of queries that I got. And I eventually got down to half a page, which was about the best I could do. But I learned so much in that time. I learned how those managers actually taught you. So he was much older than me. And the same with accounting and tax, the same thing. The partners and the senior managers sat down with us and made sure we really understood what was going on and understood each different type of business we were working in. And we were very lucky because we looked at the processes end to end, which was only done about every 3 or 4 years. So in 1 year, I learnt more than probably I've ever done in that amount of time. So it was quite incredible. So after that, I then got, I sort of thought I might go to the UK or Sydney or something like that and go for a overseas secondment. Didn't hear from the UK, but apparently later on they said, we wondered where you'd got to. The Australians came back and said they wanted me. And they'd started a new thing called computer audit, which is a combination of IT and audit. So I then did that for, I don't know how many years. And eventually I became partner in charge of that area and then was on the global committee, which was really neat because they used to have meetings in all sorts of interesting places like Sweden and Utrecht and they always found the best restaurants and the most interesting places. So it was fantastic. Learned an awful lot and then got to do all sorts of interesting new things. So when electronic commerce first came out, I ended up working with one of the senior guys at GE. And GE were like the gurus. Got to talk to Kimberly Clark, and I did a lot of traveling, found out what everyone was doing, and we went, okay, well, what are the controls and other procedures you need to make sure that you use electronic commerce or EDI properly? Now, one of the interesting things if we reflect on today, which is worth thinking about in future, is that the big companies like Coles Myer and those big organisations went, oh, good. With EDI, we can sell the goods before we have to pay for them. So it was all about cash flow. And there was a little company called Lowe's Menswear, and they went, oh, we can just buy what we're selling. And they made a huge profit, and they were like the landmark organisation for EDI and electronic commerce. And imagine what it'd be like today if we'd all done that then. So instead of having all these sales on the shelves, they were actually able to sell all their product, which is brilliant. Mm-hmm. So it was a really interesting lesson for me about looking deeper at the opportunities rather than just the high level KPIs. So then I wrote and ran a whole lot of training courses. So I went to the US, and so I got to deal with all the different cultures. And then I got breast cancer, and I just at that point I just felt like I needed to do something else. It had been great, and I was on the auditing standards board. I was doing a lot of really interesting things. Great clients. I had Lend-Lease, Stock Exchange. Oh, interesting story about the Stock Exchange. We did the audit of chess and seats when they first came in, right? And interestingly, with seats, we had just done a review of the race courses and the totalisators. And the New South Wales Sport had said, tell us how someone could fiddle the tote. We couldn't find anything. We did all of that. But then we went to the Stock Exchange for the seats review, and it turned out that the people who wrote the system for seats, which is the automated trading, which is still used today, were the same people who wrote one of the totalisator systems. If you can think about that, that's a very interesting point. Mm. So after I did all of that, I then ended up going to Macquarie Bank. They offered me a job, and I led about 5 of their different areas. And that was really good. I had a fantastic team. They were very good at selecting their staff, and it was a great organisation. Alan Moss was terrific. He got a better leadership score than me. So I thought, I'd like to get a better leadership score. So I found 3 people or 4 people in Macquarie who'd got better leadership scores than me. And I interviewed them to find out what they'd done. And I got a better leadership score the next year. But I also thought, this is fun. I'm going to write a book. So I wrote a book and interviewed David Morgan, who was the CEO of Westpac, Gordon Cairns, Michael Chaney, and various other people, and got some amazing stories. Finished the book just before Amazon really came out. And so I've got a whole several boxes of those books. Great book if people want a copy. But now that Kindle's, I've worked out how to use that. I'll be putting it on Kindle. But I didn't know how to market in those days, which is a lot easier now with the internet. So then pretty much one of the things I learned at Macquarie Bank, actually, and then I saw later on as a customer, is how important it is to have good support for the call centre. And it's something that I think is a big opportunity today. There is it's so hard when you're a customer unless you're an important person. Like if you're an important person, you ring up the CEO and say, hey, I've got a problem here, and they fix it. I've actually walked down the street and grabbed a CEO and said, your systems are rubbish. And I also rang up one day and said, I've got this problem. I'd like to speak to the CEO's executive assistant, because you never ask for the CEO. And they fixed it. But it was that hard. And I thought, it's something. And when we come in, when you start thinking about some of the things you can do with AI, there are some things that can be done there to make it easier. But certainly those people in the call centre are probably the most important people in most organisations. And then independent consultant, did a whole lot of reviews of projects at the start, projects that had gone wrong for government and all sorts of other organisations. Learned an awful lot. I mean, all my life has been learning from mistakes. And that was what my book was called, actually. Mistakes Happen, Make the Most of Them. And I think, experience for me is about learning from your own mistakes and others. And what was great coming through is all other people would say to me, well, I made this mistake. I don't want you to make the same mistake. And it's the older you are, the more you've made. So you might know this, George. Perhaps not, but it's a really great lesson.
There is nothing like the School of Hard Knocks.
Yep.
So Margaret, I just want to add another question to that, since we are already describing about all those experiences. We might want to come back to today's topic as well, towards building a better Australia. Now, out of all the experiences that you have had in the past, how do you see the role of people who are sitting on the top positions, such as yourself, towards contributing and making a better Australia? What kind of role do they play?
I think one of the things, and it's probably from my more recent experience of working with government as a resident in an area, what often happens is the people at the top think they know. And so they make all the decisions, they get the consultants and all that sort of thing, and they don't actually ask the people on the ground. And I think, and some of the CEOs I spoke to said this as well in my first book, it's really important to talk to the people who are doing the work and understand their challenges, and to talk to customers and actually get out there at the coalface and see what's really going on, because it's really hard, because for a couple of reasons. One, there's often such a big hierarchy, but the second thing is nobody really likes to deliver bad news upwards. It's a really hard thing to do, and often you get beaten up if you do it. Yep. And so make it as easy as possible for bad news to travel upwards. And that's probably government as well. I think it's also that, George, we were talking about admitting mistakes. Sometimes it's good to say, okay, we may not get this 100% right. And I have a joke, which is probably not appropriate, but I used to say the perfect system is like the perfect man. So if you think that, you're going to implement something, it's never going to be right first time. So just get used to it and ask people, what do you think we should be doing? What can we do better?
And is there something that you learned recently from a mistake that you did, which you kind of applied later on, and you realized, that was a mistake, and that's what I ended up learning?
I'm just trying to think that there's been a few things where we've been working in the area. probably when I was chair of the Strata Committee. It took me a while to work out how to, because in the Strata Committee, your customer lives with you. So, you've got to be really careful what you say, how you do things, and you've got to work out ways that they can talk to you without it getting too complicated. So I think that, and also seeing, I think, the other side of it where talking to government and actually trying to make sure that we're all on the same page and we understand each other. And sometimes that takes a lot longer than, you think, oh, I'll write a letter and they'll understand. Well, they don't. You've got to actually sometimes sit down and have a meeting and actually talk about these things and find the people that really care as well.
So for the people watching this episode, what is OmniTabs and what's its purpose?
Oh, okay. Well, we just launched our website today.
Wow.
Yep. It's really cool. We're so excited. It just looks, it's taken a very long time. But basically, OmniTabs is keeping tabs on everything remote. So our first page says, if a tree falls in the forest, how would you know?
Okay.
If a mine is leaking chemicals out in the middle of nowhere, how would you know?
Yep.
And my husband actually is an expert in Internet of Things, and he's been at telcos for his whole life. So he's worked out how to take information to and from satellite in remote areas. So how apparently it's 90% of Australia has got no effective internet or unreliable internet. He's set it up so that you can be almost anywhere, and either you can go directly to the satellite or he's got an extender that enables you to go to the satellite. So there's about 5 or 6 different things you can do. We're looking at floodways. We've got signs and floodways that light up and say danger and send information back to council. So it's for anything where it's remote, and it's great for Australia because everything, there's so much remote area where there are so many things that could go wrong and you never know about them. And if you can find out about them straight away, it makes a really big difference.
And how did that come about? What caused OmniTabs to be created?
My husband is a serial, what is he? A serial startup.
I thought you were saying serial investor.
No. No, we'll be looking for some, but no. So he did a lot of work on Big Pond at the start. He was involved in 2 or 3 of the other telcos, and he's very good at setting things up. But once it's all set up, he gets a bit bored.
Yep.
So we've been involved in quite a few startups, and this is his own one. So he's basically the brains behind it. Yeah.
So how do you see the role of smaller companies as well? Because it's not only about the larger companies. The startup ecosystem has been growing pretty fast in the recent years in Australia. Is it also creating a change in the way people look at startups and making a better Australia?
I think startups provide an opportunity for young people. And actually some older people as well. I don't think we should just assume that startups are only young people. And it provides an opportunity to do new things and to have a bit more freedom. But it's interesting that we're actually, in OmniTabs, we're actually working with about 5 or 6 different large companies. And the lucky thing about having worked with large companies, we understand how it works. So we understand the whole working with people in a large company. And I think there's value in Australia in having both and working together and working out how you ensure that both of them get value out of it. So the relationships we've got with some of these large companies, MRSAT, which is a English company, and Actility, a French company, it's the biggest Internet of Things provider in the world. We're able to work directly with their people and establish personal relationships, and then it becomes very workable, and it works for them and it works for us. So I'm sure that is something, if we really focused on it and worked out how we get people working together. That could be brilliant for Australia, actually, because we've got both here.
So, Margaret, do you see that Australia has got some challenges at the moment? So, I wanted to discuss about some of the top challenges that Australia faces at the moment. We've been covering some special series of episodes on foreign diplomacy as well recently, where we talked about that Australia has got a lot of challenges in terms of climate change, in terms of
Yes.
the security in the Indo-Pacific, and the different kind of Cold War situation that we might be ending towards. There is a cybersecurity threat, which is surrounding. We
Yes.
recently know what happened with companies like Optus and PwC recently. So we don't want to, get into any particular companies here, but what we want to know is, are there any challenges that Australia is surrounded by, and what role does the companies and the government play in kind of tackling those challenges?
I think this is a tricky one, actually. I've been thinking about this myself and trying to work out how I might be able to help, because in some cases, and I'm thinking robo-debt, PwC, remember I talked about how the perfect system is like the perfect man. There's sort of like, in some ways, once something gets out there and is done, nobody sits down and says, what can go wrong? And I think there's a really big place for imagination and being able to get people in a room and saying, okay, let's work out what could go right and how do we make that happen? And then what can go wrong? And there's a lot of talk these days about AI, and there's a lot of really brilliant work being done by the University of New South Wales and others, and UTS, I think. UTS is the other one. So picking up on that, it's as good a work being done here, I think, as anywhere. There's some good work being done in cyber, but I think what's happened is people have got a bit complacent, and I think we've got to really be a lot more creative around risk, which is the stuff that I really enjoy, and other people, and so it's almost like working out how we can get some of our smartest people, and maybe some of the cynical older people as well, to say, okay, well, this is what we're trying to do. Tell us what could go wrong. Let's do some scenario planning and actually work out how we could do this better. And then when things go wrong, I think we really need to investigate them immediately, so not take so long to get through, and sit down and go, okay, let's forget about finding fault right now, and let's work out what we could have done better, and how we can do that, and how we can make it happen, and share the stories. I mean, a lot of these stories are being hidden, and that's one of the biggest issues, is people we're only finding out now about PwC, for example. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Did you have any questions for her, George?
Yeah. So from your background, you've seen a lot of things created, and they take off, and we talk about the imperfections and things like that. What's your personal thoughts as far as the danger that not only Australia but the world has at the moment by being too complacent of allowing AI to launch and get a foothold without the rules and the regulations having been thought through? We're all warned about the World Wide Web, and they didn't do it then.
Yep.
And look at the mess that got into. So what's your thoughts on the risks involved with AI if it's not sorted before too much longer?
I think it does need to be sorted, and quickly. But I also think that we shouldn't just think we've sorted it in 5 minutes and then say it's done, because I think we'll keep finding new issues and questions. The other thing, AI is a tricky one, because in some ways AI and data have got a huge number of benefits, and they can make things a lot easier. I mean, I've used ChatGPT a few times, and in the right circumstances, the AI is brilliant, actually. But the problem is in the wrong hands. But the other problem is that it's like people and motivation. So it's almost like thinking about what motivation and what objectives we're setting, and being really clear. And one of the things that I found with IT, and AI is the same really, is often we end up getting it wrong because we didn't define our objectives properly and we didn't really think through what could go wrong. So I think that it's probably it's a mixture, because we've seen if humans have got the wrong motivation, we have the same problem. I think we've got the right people looking at it, but it's a matter of, are they all going to talk to each other and come up with some practical solutions? And I think it'd be pity to not be able to use some of the easier stuff to do. It's almost like there are some things, if you use them, they're fine. And so it's almost like categorize them and then work out where the real dangers are and focus on them. And don't stop doing it, because it'll keep happening, I think.
And I think one of the issues when you talk about AI, you've got to start to pull things apart, because to a degree, a calculator is AI. A computer is AI. So when you think of it being able to do mathematics and all of that calculating, no, we're not trying to stop that. But I was having this discussion with somebody the other day, and I said, we've all seen various videos of famous people who there's a video of Obama saying the most ridiculous things and things like that. Now, one of the chaps that I was talking to said, yeah, but it's just a bit of fun and all of that. I said, I recited to him that I think it was about within the last week, I was driving into a meeting at about 6:30 in the morning. Somebody had done a video of there being an explosion at the Pentagon or something like that.
I saw that, yep.
And wiped off $500 million off the stock market. And then they, oh no, that was just pretend. So to me, he was saying I was being draconian, because I said it needed to be illegal to do something like that without it being watermarked. And he said, oh, people can work that out. And I said, well, somebody that lost $500 million might disagree with you.
And the problem is two things, actually. I think you make a really good point about the watermarking, because all of this fake stuff is really scary.
Yeah.
And it's also agitating people. When we need to connect more, not get more angry with each other. Yep. And so that's a really good point. But the other one that's really interesting is that if something goes wrong these days, it goes like that and it's done. So you transfer money these days with scams and that sort of thing, and the money's gone before you can even blink. And same with the stock exchange, which is what I meant about the horse racing. It's like, in a few minutes, the stock market can go up or down billions of dollars.
Yeah.
And so the impacts of getting things wrong are really serious. And so I agree. Yeah. Then it's a matter of working out what are going to be the problems and almost scenario planning each different type to say, okay, what are the risks here? Because they're not all the same.
No.
Yep. I think it's all about evaluating the risks in that whole cycle, and then kind of understanding and getting down to each of those risks to understand how can we tackle those risks, breaking it down into smaller pieces and then trying to solve the problem instead of looking at the larger problem. Break it down into smaller chunks and then kind of think about it. But I also wanted to discuss with you, Margaret, on another interesting point is I see this as a triangle of stakeholders that we're talking about. So in that triangle, there are three important stakeholders in Australia. One is the universities, which are kind of building the future of Australia. There are so many graduates coming out of the universities every year. And those are the people who kind of form the future of Australia, who will be in the industry in the upcoming years. Then the second part of that triangle is industry itself. The people who are currently in the industry, they are working, they are contributing to the economy each and every day. And the third part of that triangle is the government, which kind of governs the rules of the country and sets how the universities will run, how the industry will run. Do you think that there is an importance of any of these stakeholders more than the others? Or how do you see that triangle working in the coming years?
That's a really interesting question, actually, because I think they're all important and they need to be working together. as well. But the other thing that is really important are the people that are impacted by all of this. And that's where I was sort of going with some of this is I now know an awful lot of older people who are feeling a bit disenfranchised. And I think there's an opportunity to bring back some people who've seen some things like my first job, where they've seen stuff and you've got that living where you go, oh, what I used to think was the way things work isn't necessarily. And so invite some of the people out in the, you know, some of the sort of like voters, citizens, and say, okay, what are you concerned about? Because sometimes the people in the corporates and the universities and the government don't actually see that. And I think that would be another thing that would be really, really useful is to engage more people. And I think it's also important to engage both the people who, you know, sort of with experience like myself, professionals and that sort of thing, but also one of the things, and I put it in my notes that I gave to you about the kids that we used to help who lived in social housing. And those people, they're not stupid, but we don't look after them. We had one kid who was told he could never read, and the girls used to sit beside him at the tennis court. And one day we said, here's a book on tennis. And there were really, with words in there I didn't understand. And he insisted on reading it every day he came to tennis. And he ended up, they said, oh, you're never going to get to the right level in year 12. He blitzed it. And I think the other thing we really need to start thinking about is engaging everyone, not just the people who appear to be important. It's actually because some of those people see things that we just don't see, and I think it's important to get those experiences as well.
And possibly the same question for George as well. So George, on the basis of your experience because you talk to university students quite a lot, we have interviewed people from the government as well recently. And we talk to industry people. Do you see that there is a importance of any of these stakeholders more than the others, or do you weigh them equally?
Well, the thing is that they've all got different.
George.
Sorry.
I think they've all got a role to play. If you want to get a better outcome, you have to have a better input.
Yes.
Therefore, if governments and industry are primarily the educators of the students, you have to get those two right, because somebody that you know, Sarab, I always like to beat up on in my personal view. Would you rather somebody be taught morals and ethics by Rupert Murdoch or Mother Teresa? Right now, either there's a wonderful book that was written, Rich Dad Poor Dad, which talks about you have to have that balance. Okay, so if governments and industry don't teach younger people the right morals, the right ethics, then all they're going to be is educated in the wrong morals and the wrong ethics. And as you know, I've started this program of introducing university students to B&I networking globally to build a better business.
Right.
And what that's about is if you get the uni students coming in and learning about givers gain and learning about as you help, you can get benefit, then as they take over the industry, the commerce, the whatever, you've got the right sort of spirit growing up. But if every tradesperson, if every university student, if every person learning a trade or a profession or a service industry is taught, look after yourself, don't worry about the boss, don't worry about people, you're not going to change an attitude. Yeah. So to me, all are important, but you've got to have the educators educating correctly.
Yeah. And I think, Mark, yeah, and I think
from the universities and the TAFEs as well, for that matter.
Yeah. And that might be a question for Margaret as well, that, it's not only responsibility for the CEOs or the people who are sitting at the top positions. I think every citizen, if they take their
Yes.
responsibility, that we contribute towards a better country or we contribute towards a better globe. That's how you start, building good habits and doing something for your country and for a better world.
And also working out how we can almost promote people doing the right thing, because we see an awful lot of the wrong thing. It'd be great if we could see more of people who are actually contributing and have got that ethical backbone that you're talking about, George, because that's so important.
Before we end today's podcast, Margaret, one of my last questions for you would be, if you have to look back at all your experiences and summarize and come together with your top 3 key learning experiences for the CEOs or other business leaders, what will that be?
I think the first one is to connect with different people and understand where their perspectives and value those perspectives, because there isn't ever a simple answer to anything. So that's probably the first one. The second one is I think around looking at risk differently. We spend a lot of time, doing processes and that sort of thing. I think we need to just step back and say, okay, what can go wrong? And then consider the impacts of that. So how many people is it affecting and what does it mean? And then probably in the connection thing as well is what I've seen is, and it's really good to see more women and people from other countries and that sort of thing in senior positions, because I think understanding other people and with that perspective and then asking questions. So instead of sort of assuming we know, it's actually really important to sort of get underneath that and understand people's background. And it's a bit like with the kids down the road. We used to say to them, look, we might live in a really fancy apartment, but some of us used to wear secondhand shoes when we were kids. And so you do well as well. So it's actually being able to encourage people and set a standard. I think, George, you were talking about that as well, is it's really important that the leaders actually set the right example.
And is it also linked to your book, this question, Margaret, that you said that learning from your mistakes, do you think that, people like George, people like yourself, can be of great value to youngsters? Because some of the mistakes that we might be doing for the first time, you've already thought about it 100 times before. For you, it might be an obvious thing that, this is obvious. But for us, it might be, oh, this is not obvious. I'm doing it for the first time. Sorry. So, that's where the coaching and the guidance from people who have got that experience can make youngsters make lesser mistakes, or at least learn quickly from whatever mistakes they are doing, isn't it?
Yes. And then the trick is for us to do it with kindness and compassion, and for the young people to do it with sort of understanding that maybe other people have got different experiences as well.
Any final questions from you, Mr. Mavros?
No, but as always, when you ask me, is there any other questions, I want to make an observation. I think one of the best takeaways that I got from Margaret was very early in the piece, when she said we need to look deeper at the risks and the things that could go wrong than just sitting at the top and looking at the opportunities. And I think that is one of the most profound statements that people should be hearing from this whole conversation. Part of the problem, I think, is there's so much in business now where business leaders and coaches and whatever, we talk about fail fast and learn from your mistakes. The inference is that you should fail. You don't have to fail. You don't have to fail. But if that statement of fail fast and learn is about don't wait until it's perfect before you have a go. But by the same token, if you're designing a new bungee cord for people to jump, if you're designing the new engine for an airplane, wait for it to be perfect. Think about what could go wrong if it's not quite right. So there are some areas in our life where you don't want to fail fast or slow. And I think getting that balance, but looking deeper at the risk and looking at risk as a general thing in a different way. I thank you for sharing that with us, Margaret.
Thank you.
Yep. So, well, thank you so much, Margaret. Really appreciate you spending time with us. I'm sure this episode will be a great value addition to the already existing series of episodes that we are doing with the other CEOs.
Thank you, you guys. You do a fantastic job, and I was a bit quite nervous. I always am with this, and you put me at ease, and you asked very insightful questions. So all the best for the future, because this is a great podcast series. Thank you very much.
This is an ultimate global podcast. Hello, and welcome to our special weekly podcast on trending international and social affairs. You're listening to Saurabh Kora and George Mavros from Sydney.